Higher Education and Training Minister Nzimande is calling on universities to do their part in developing African languages. He also believes institutions need to up their game in preparing students for the fourth industrial revolution. Nzimande joins me now to discuss this. Minister, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. I want to start with to talk about the fourth industrial revolution first. Critics of South Africa's collective approach, and I'm talking here about all of us, say it is pointless for all of us to shout fourth industrial revolution if we are not clear first about the kind of country we want to create for ourselves, and subsequently, if we're not investing in that future that we would have identified for ourselves.
Thanks, Vuyo. Good evening to you, to your listeners as well as the viewers. I think it's important, this question you are raising. We are fortunate that in this area of the fourth industrial revolution, we are actually led from the front by the President. The President Ramaphosa, has already established a presidential commission on the fourth industrial revolution, which he chairs himself and brings together experts as well as relevant ministers, like our ministry as one of those that should actually be participating. This is very important. But also my predecessor, Minister Pando, just before the elections, also appointed a ministerial task team to actually investigate the implications of the fourth industrial revolution for our universities and colleges and what we actually teach there. But it's not enough, that we should actually just be seeing ourselves as recipients of the Industrial Revolution. That's why this ministry now, which combines higher education and training as well as science and technology, we are also supporting and investing a lot of resources, although they are not adequate in terms of where we want to go at the moment, into innovation and supporting research and development, including, for instance, something that as South Africans sometimes we don't emphasize enough, the need to actually support postgraduate students, because it's your master's, PhDs, which are also the basis, for innovation and in order to be able to take our economy forward. Much more importantly is then to make sure that we also have got an institutional landscape to be able to respond, and also to be drivers, by the way, of the fourth industrial revolution, because as South Africans ourselves, we are innovators and creators. I am at the moment undertaking part 2 of a review. Do we have the institutions to actually train people, to actually do the kinds of research that we need to do, in order that we are not left behind, but we are part of, and even being leading in some instances, in the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, Minister, there are people who are arguing that we are already way behind. Let's speak to some of the issues that you have just raised, perhaps to illustrate that point, or the point that I'm saying some of the critics are raising. According to the President, the commission you just referred to will deliver a blueprint and a plan to deal with the fourth industrial revolution. Now, critics are saying the bus has already left the station and we are only at the initial stage, and arguing that it doesn't make sense for us to say what the President said, which was that this plan that the Commission will come up with will then ensure that we are not only an adopter but a leader. How do we become a leader if we haven't really gotten off the starting blocks?
Vuyo, the matter we are raising is very important. I wouldn't say that we are entirely left behind. The situation is uneven. Let me start by the positives. South Africa has got some great innovations, that we've created ourselves. For example, we are actually now very advanced in using what is one of our most important mineral resources, platinum, to actually produce a hydrogen fuel cell, which is an alternative to the fuel that we are using now. It's much more cleaner fuel and so on. We are leading on that score as South Africa, and there are many other innovations that we are actually involved in that are placing. In fact, in terms of our global rankings, out of 120 countries, we are number 62 in the world. And if you were just to compare us with developing countries, we are much, much higher, which actually means that we do have a potential, and already there are certain things we are achieving. Of course, I'm saying the situation is uneven because our investment into research and development as a percentage of our gross domestic product is still low at about 0.8%. In terms of the National Development Plan, we should be taking that to 1.5%, which is one of the challenges that is facing my department as well as government as a whole. You know, last week we were actually awarding women in science, and some of the things that some of the women are actually coming up with, they really give hope that as South Africa, we will not only just be recipients or victims, as some would say, of the fourth industrial revolution, but will be innovators and actually be able to participate. The fact that we are putting these structures in place means that as a country, we really want to say, unlike the earlier revolutions, let's not actually remain behind. Let's be part of this movement way forward. Another thing I must say, by the way, Vuyo, is that we are investing also in new industries. For instance, we have got a small but growing vaccine production industry, which is producing vaccines that are needed in our country, that are needed in the continent, and those are new things that we've actually discovered here in South Africa that are enabling us to be able to move forward. So with all that, I am very confident and positive that as a country we are really very well placed despite the many challenges that we actually still face. Our orientation should be, how do we build on the achievements we have and make sure that the rest of the system also is made to catch up as quickly as possible?
I'm glad, Minister, you're mentioning platinum, citing it as an example and the advances that are being made there. I'm also glad you're making reference to earlier industrial revolutions, because I was reading a piece by Alison Gilwald, who's an adjunct professor based at the University of Cape Town. She says if you look at the lessons from earlier industrial revolutions, we can see how they have not necessarily been associated with interests of the working or under classes. And that's not, she quickly points out, to deny the broader benefits for society. And it also brings me to your platinum example. You look at what is going on now with the current wage negotiations. The unions are laughing, really frustrated at the kinds of offers that are being put on the table. There's also talk of retrenchments. And this is the dilemma that a lot of critics of current approaches to the fourth industrial revolution are raising.
Well, Vuyo, it's a very important matter that we are raising. What I want to underline is that technology on its own and in itself can make a big contribution in improving people's lives. But it has to be accompanied by continuing struggles. Struggles to ensure that, for instance, we confront issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in society. I was emphasizing this point, for instance, that in affirming women in science, which is what we were doing through the awards last week, we must also make sure that we intensify the struggle for gender equality. Because if we don't do that, we are going to have technology that is favoring men And technology, of course, is often harnessed by those with resources and with money. So unless also we mobilize people as well to be able to say, let's confront the issues of inequality, we are not going to make a way forward, which, by the way, also relates to the fact that when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we tend to talk about digital technologies, which is very important. But at the same time, humanities and social sciences are very important because technology is supposed to be serving humanity. And how are changes in technology affecting communities, how they are affecting families? For example, today, it's highly likely if you get into a family sitting in a lounge at this time, they are not talking to each other, either watching television or on their cell phones. What implications does that have in terms of building social cohesion going forward as technology tends to absorb people as individuals rather than to promote family or community spirit? So it's very important that we don't separate technological advances from struggles for equality, because the two will have to go together all the time.
I want to end on this note, something you sort of in passing mentioned right at the start of our conversation. I want to ask you whether you think that our higher education institutions are able to respond to our fourth industrial revolution needs, and do so at the required speed. Do they have the agility? And whichever way you answer that question, speak also to your role in ensuring that they do in fact do that.
Well, government is putting in a lot of money, for instance, into ensuring access into our universities and colleges. For instance, over the next 3 years, we'll be setting aside 80 billion rands for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And in addition to that, this year alone, we are going to be spending about 1.5 billion rands to support research as well as postgraduate students in our universities. So government is putting a lot of effort into that, including building infrastructure, tackling issues of student accommodation. But at the same time, that is not enough if also people who are using or who are in the system, they also do not ensure stability. You know, one of the things that continue to worry me is this thing of actually just striking and disruption of academic activities, like recently it has happened in Sefako Makgato University, whilst at the same time what the democratic government has done is to create institutions like university councils where everybody is represented, your professors, your workers, your students, so that they are able to deal with these problems. One of the things is that we are saying, yes, people must protest, but one of the biggest challenges we have is actually to stabilize governance so that we can have institutions that are able to respond to the many, many challenges that we actually have. My commitment is, firstly, like as the president does, I'm prepared to work with all the critical stakeholders across the sector in this area of knowledge production and skills development, so that we are all together able to say we can actually be able to move forward. Government alone will not be able to tackle these problems. That's our belief. That is why we are creating all these institutions and arrangements in order to make sure that we are all part of it and we feel to be part of it. Without that, we are actually not going to be able to make much progress.
Higher Education and Training Minister Nzimande, thank you very much for your time this evening.